Chapter 5 Experimental Research. Imagine you are at a busy train station, surrounded by hundreds of people rushing to catch a train to work or school. Meanwhile, you are headed to work. Suddenly, you see a commuter collapse on the ground. What would you do? Would you stop to lend a hand, or would you keep going because you are running late? This actually happened to me when I was a graduate student. This kind of question was not asked by psychologists until the tragic incident in Queens, New York in 1964. Kitty Genovese, I hope I said it right, a young woman coming home late at night, was followed by a suspect. Outside her apartment, she was brutally stabbed multiple times while she desperately screamed for help. Surprisingly, despite having 38 witnesses, none of them stepped in or called the police right away. The suspect fled, but came back a few minutes later to rape and murder her. Sadly, no one intervened or contacted the police. Now, to be fair, the 911 emergency calls did not exist back then. Still, it's hard to believe no one stepped in to help this young woman. After the fact, neighbors claimed they were afraid of becoming the next victims, but according to the media, witnesses did not intervene because people in big cities are so accustomed to seeing terrible things that they become numb to crime. Two psychologists, Joan Darley and Bib Lawton, I think that's how you pronounce the last name, were struck by this tragic incident and launched an investigation. They suggested that the bystanders need to identify an emergency situation, but they may assume that a person on the ground might be intoxicated or simply part of a plan. If others are not showing concern, they rationalize that it is likely not an emergency. These two researchers called this phenomenon pluralistic ignorance, where the assumption is that since no one is acting, your belief that it's an emergency must be wrong. The second process is that even if you recognize it as an emergency, the presence of others stops you from offering help due to the diffusion of responsibility. If you are not helping, but the rest of the bystanders are not either, at least you can justify that you are not the only one who did not act. Each individual feels less responsible for and less guilty about the outcome. Those two researchers conducted a series of experiments to test whether the number of bystanders affect the likelihood of helping behaviors. In one study, participants were instructed to complete a questionnaire in the lab. There was one participant in one condition and three participants in another condition. While working on the questionnaire, smoke emerged from the vent in both conditions. The dependent variable was whether participants reported smoking or not. In the alone condition, smoke was reported 75% of the time, whereas in the group condition, it was reported only 38% of the time. Some participants in the group condition remained in the lab even though they could not see the questionnaires because of the smoke. The research studies that those two researchers they conducted were a particular kind of study called an experiment. The experiments are used to determine not only whether there is a meaningful relationship between two variables, independent variable and a dependent variable, but also whether the relationship is a causal one that is supported by statistical analysis. For this reason, experiments are one of the most common and the useful tools in the psychological researcher's toolbox. Now, story of Kitty Genovese has been repeated in many psychology textbooks. As discussed earlier, the common version states that 38 witnesses saw and heard the attack over time but did nothing, right? Recent research shows, however, that this is not accurate. Only six testified at trial, and none of them knew it was a lethal assault. And some even called the police or tried to help the victim. While the story sparked research on the bystander effect and diffusion of responsibility, it may have distracted from other important and interesting research questions about when people respond collectively in emergencies. In this chapter, we examine experiments in detail, including between subjects' designs and within subjects' designs. We also discuss several key practical issues that arise when conducting experiments. Section 23, Experiment Basics. So what is experiment? In an experiment, the minimum number of conditions or groups you must have is two. And an experimental or treatment condition and a comparison or control condition. In this course, I might use different terms that mean the same thing, such as experimental condition and a treatment condition, as well as condition and group. So experimental condition and a treatment condition are the same thing. Uh, the comparison condition is also usually the same thing as the control condition. I may use these terms interchangeably. The minimum number of variables you must have is also two, independent variable and a dependent variable. The independent variable is a variable that is manipulated by the researcher, while the dependent variable is the measurable variable. Each variable must have at least two levels. Let's look at the study of Seeing Red, which tested the effect of ink color and how it influences academic performance. In this experiment, participants were asked to complete a test of anagrams that needed to be unscrambled. Everything is constant across the different conditions except for the color of the participant's ID number on the front page of the test booklet. It was either red, green, or black. As you can see on the graph, the participants in the black condition performed the best. Those in the green condition came second, and those in the red condition performed the worst. Because the color of the ID number was the only difference among three conditions, and everything else was held constant, researchers concluded that the color caused the difference in anagram performance. Here is a second example of an experimental study. Researchers in 2012 examined whether the size of serving bowls affects how much people eat. The participants were randomly assigned to a large or medium bowl condition. During a kitchen lab lunch at the all-you-can-eat pasta cafeteria, they served themselves from a bowl. Each bowl was weighed before eating, and the amount of pasta consumed was determined afterward. Participants consumed more pasta and calories when they were given the large bowl compared to the medium bowl. Since only bowl size varied, researchers concluded it influenced pasta intake. The study implies that using a smaller plate or bowl can help reduce food intake. Now, please note that there is only one independent variable in each of these experimental studies. In the Seeing Red experiment, the independent variable is the ink color, and this independent variable has three levels, black, green, and red, right? In the eating pasta experiment, the size of the bowl is the independent variable, and it has two levels. One is medium size, and the other is a large size. So I don't want you guys to be confused that these experiments have three or two levels of the three or two independent variables because they don't. Each of these experiments only has one independent variable. The measured variable or dependent variable for the seeing red experiment is an anagram test score, which has multiple levels. In the eating pasta experiment, the dependent variable is the amount of pasta consumed or calories, which also has multiple levels. Extraneous variables are variables that are not the independent variable or dependent variable and are not manipulated by researchers. To minimize the effect of unwanted extraneous variables, researchers hold all variables constant between different conditions, such as testing their participants in the same room by the same experimenter at around the same time of the day, etc. Manipulation of independent variable. An independent variables levels are systematically manipulated by a researcher. In a pasta experiment, researchers manipulated the amount of pasta participants consumed. I should say that they manipulated the size of the bowl. It's either large or medium bowl. Therefore, there are two conditions. Again, in this experiment, in this example, there is a single independent variable with two levels, which is called a single factor two level design. In another example, the study of the color of ink, the independent variable is still single, just one independent variable, but with three levels, black, green, and red. This design is called a single factor multi-level design. In an experiment, researchers must be able to manipulate an independent variable, such as changing the size of the pasta bowl or the color of the ink. In contrast, someone's personality, gender, hair color, the number of siblings they have, their preference for food, and those are variables that cannot be manipulated by the researcher, so they cannot be tested in an experimental study. Control of extraneous variables. Extraneous variables can be any variables in the context of a study other than the independent variables and the dependent variables. Participant variables or individual differences such as cognitive abilities, hair color, race, age, educational level, and situational variables like the time of the experiment, weather, temperature, and humidity can be extraneous variables. Those extraneous variables can become a problem because many of them are likely to have some effect on the dependent variable. And when this happens, it's difficult to separate the effect of independent variables and extraneous variables when analyzing the obtained data. Researchers attempt to minimize the impact of extraneous variables by maintaining a consistent environment across different conditions, except for the independent variables, and randomly assigning participants to these conditions. Extraneous variables as noise. Those variables make it difficult to detect the effect of the independent variable. For example, imagine that you are testing the effect of the use of the mental imagery on working memory. Your participants' age range from 18 to 99, and some are college educated while others are high school dropouts. Their sexual orientation, handedness, IQ, and the number of siblings they have are all diverse. Some are tested in the morning, but are mostly tested in the afternoon. In one condition, participants who gather in one room are instructed to use the mental imagery, while those in another condition who gather in another room are told not to use the mental imagery. Because the sample you recruit is very diverse and you don't test them in the same room, these individual and situational differences may or may not contribute to the change in the dependent variable. These extraneous variables may function as noise to cloud the effect of the independent variable in experimental studies. One way to control such extraneous variables is to keep them constant. Be selective when recruiting participants or analyzing their data. For example, exclude participants' data from analysis if they are left-handed, 50 years or older, and so on. An obvious downside is that you are limiting external validity, but if the main purpose of your study is to examine the effect of mental imagery on working memory, you don't necessarily need to worry too much about external validity. You can leave this question to other researchers or address it in your future study. Extraneous variables as confounding variables. Another way extraneous variables can become problematic when detecting the effect of the independent variable is when they turn into confounding variables. So extraneous variables can turn into confounding variables. Those variables, confounding variables, differ across conditions systematically. In other words, these variables act as if they are independent variables. So that can be a real issue. For example, participants' IQ is almost always an extraneous variable. However, the level of IQ does not pose a threat when analyzing the data in your experiment as long as the participants with different IQ levels are evenly distributed across different conditions by randomization. However, it becomes problematic when the mean IQ level of one condition is higher than that of another condition. In this case, the IQ becomes a confounding variable. Another example of a confounding variable is the time of day the experiment is conducted, especially when cognitive abilities are being tested and participants are older individuals. In the previous slide, I mentioned a hypothetical study that looked at how mental imagery affects working memory. Traditionally, researchers have shown that the research studies have shown that the memory declines with age, right? I think everyone heard about that. But recent findings suggest that older individuals can retain memory just as much as younger counterparts as long as they are tested in the morning. The reason many past psychological studies have underestimated older individuals' memory capacity is that most of these studies were conducted in the afternoon, and they probably did not even consider that the time of testing can affect the memory of these individuals. Treatment and control conditions. Psychological research defines a treatment, an independent variable, as any intervention aimed at improving people's behavior. This can include psychotherapies and medical treatments for mental health conditions, as well as interventions designed to enhance learning, promote conservation, reduce prejudice, etc. To investigate whether a treatment works, the participants are randomly assigned to either a treatment condition or a control condition. All variables are held constant between these conditions, except for the treatment or the independent variable. And in this way, if one of these two groups is different in the dependent variable, researchers can conclude that it is because of the effect of the treatment. For example, let's say researchers developed a new type of therapy for depression. Participants are randomly assigned to one of the two conditions. And when the level of depression statistically differs between these conditions, researchers can conclude that this new therapy may be effective. This type of experiment is often referred to as a randomized clinical trial. There are several types of control conditions. In a no treatment control condition, participants do not receive any treatment. However, this condition can pose a problem. Consider the hypothetical experimental results shown in the slide. The x-axis represents three types of conditions, while the y-axis shows the improvement score. Participants in the no treatment condition showed improvement compared to those in the treatment condition, but it's possible that the improvement was due to a placebo effect rather than the treatment itself. A placebo effect occurs when participants experience improvement because they expect the treatment to be effective rather than due to its actual effect. To counterbalance this effect, researchers often include a placebo condition where participants are told that a fake treatment they are receiving is proven effective. And of course, they are not told that the treatment is fake. As shown in the graph, participants in the placebo condition did improve, but not as much as those in the treatment condition, indicating the effectiveness of the treatment. In other words, the effect of the treatment includes the combination of both the effect of the treatment itself and the placebo effect. Now, obviously, the principle of informed consent requires researchers to disclose that participants will be assigned to either a treatment or a placebo condition before they agree to participate. However, researchers are not required to tell them which one until the end of the experiment. Those assigned to the control group, including the no treatment group and the placebo group, should be offered the chance to receive the actual treatment. Another type of control condition is called wait list control condition. Participants who sign up but are still waiting to participate in the study and receive the treatment are compared to those in the treatment group. Researchers can also compare two different treatment types like treatment A or treatment B without needing a control condition. Participants' expectations can be reasonably similar since they receive the actual treatment in either of the conditions. Therefore, there is no need to worry about the placebo effect. When it comes to the placebo effect, it's actually quite powerful. A team of medical researchers carried out a study to explore the impact of placebo surgery on knee osteoarthritis. Participants in the treatment group underwent the actual surgery, while those in the placebo group did not, except for surgery prep, tranquilizer, and three small incisions in their knees to mimic the surgery. The researchers found that participants in the placebo group experienced decreased pain and improved knee function just as much as those who had the actual surgery. This shows just how much our minds can influence our bodies. 24. Experimental design. In this section, we will discuss between subjects experiments and within subjects experiments. In between subject design or between subjects experiment, each participant is randomly assigned to only one condition. This experimental design is also known as an independent groups design or between groups design. These names are used interchangeably, but they are all the same, simply with the different names. Let's use the past experiment as an example. Researchers use random assignment because it ensures that the average characteristics of participants are statistically the same in both groups when a large enough number of participants are randomly selected. The random assignment must be conducted under the two assumptions. One is that each participant has an equal chance of being assigned to each condition. That means if there are two conditions, there's a 50% chance of being assigned to each condition. Researchers can flip the coin to assign them. The second assumption is that each participant is assigned to a condition separately from the other participants. In other words, one participant's assignment should not affect the random assignment of the next participant. When you flip the coin, you have 50% chance of getting heads and another 50% chance of getting tails. Therefore, theoretically speaking, you should have the same number of participants in each condition. However, this can occur only if you flip the coin an infinite number of times. If your sample size is small, there is always a chance that you will have more participants in one condition than the other. Um, to address this problem, researchers can use block randomization. Suppose you only have nine participants and three conditions. Condition A, condition B, and condition C. You start by randomly selecting three participants and randomly assigning them to conditions A, B, or C. After assigning these three, you move on to the next three participants and randomly assign them to A, B, or C. You continue this process until all nine participants are assigned. This block randomization method is useful when working with a small sample size, but you want to ensure an equal number of participants in each condition. Now, keep in mind that random assignment doesn't always eliminate the issue of extraneous variables, particularly when the sample size is small. Even if you increase the sample size, there is always a chance of making an error since you are using inferential statistics. However, it's okay because you or someone else can replicate your study later to identify and correct those errors. This just the normal part of the scientific method. An alternate to simple random assignment of participants to different conditions is the use of a matched groups design, in which the pairs of participants are matched on an individual differences variable before an independent variable is introduced. This design enables researchers to observe the effects of the independent variables easily. For example, if you are studying how mental imagery influences memory, start by collecting IQ scores from all participants and then ranking them from highest to lowest. The reason you want to use the IQ score to sort out participants is that IQ scores and memory are closely related. In this hypothetical study, there are two conditions, so you would select the two participants with the highest IQ scores and randomly assign each of them to one of the conditions. Then take the participants with the third and the fourth highest scores and randomly assign them to one of the conditions. Continue this process until you assign all participants. With this procedure, you can ensure that the average IQ scores of two conditions are roughly equal. In a within subject experiment or repeated measures experiment, each participant is tested more than once in different conditions. This design is also known as a within groups design or within subjects design. Unlike between subject designs, the participants in within groups designs are exposed to all levels of the independent variable. Imagine you are participating in a pasta bowl experiment. In one condition, you are given a medium-sized bowl at the all-you-can-eat pasta cafeteria. 2 weeks later, you are at the same cafeteria, but this time with a large size bowl. The advantage of a within subject experiment is that extraneous participant variables are controlled. In other words, because data is collected from the same participant in different conditions, there will be no individual differences between conditions. Researchers do not even need to sort participants to control individual differences before an independent variable is introduced. In addition, this type of design requires fewer participants compared to a between subjects experiment. Generally, it is compared. Generally, it is recommended to have at least 30 participants in each sample uh, or each group. This means that if you are conducting a between subjects experiment with two conditions, you need to have a minimum of 60 participants, whereas in a within subjects experiment, you just need 30 participants. And no matter how many conditions you have in a within subject experiment, you just need 30 participants. Let's say that you have like, I don't know, six conditions. So all 30 participants will have to go through all six conditions. Now, it appears that within subject design is superior to between subject design, but there are some drawbacks. One is an order effect, which occurs when participants' responses in the various conditions are affected by the order of conditions to which they were exposed. One type of order effect is called the carryover effect, in which the effect of the first condition influences the following conditions. One type of carryover effect is called the practice effect, in which participants perform better when they are tested the second time. Fatigue effect occurs when participants become tired or bored when tested in the second condition. When the experienced participants go through in the first condition changes their performance in the second condition, it's called the context or contrast effect. For example, participants may judge an average-looking defendant more harshly shortly after judging an attractive defendant. Unless the order effects are the focus of the experiment, they can be problematic in experiment because these effects themselves become confounding variables. To control these confounding variables, researchers employ a technique called counterbalancing in within subject experiments. Instead of testing all participants in the same order, researchers assign some participants in a different order to cancel out order effects. For instance, suppose an experiment has two conditions. Researchers create two sequences. In the first sequence, participants experience condition A followed by condition B. In the second sequence, the order is reversed. Participants are then randomly assigned to one of the two sequences. This method helps ensure that any effects related to order will neutralize each other. Now, there are two types of counterbalancing. In the complete counterbalancing, participants will go through all conditions in a different order. For example, let's say there are four conditions, A, B, C, and D. One participant will be assigned to the sequence A, B, C, and D. Another participant will be assigned to the sequence B, C, D, and A, and so forth. This design makes sure that all combinations of the order of the conditions are utilized. However, this complete counterbalancing may not be practical if researchers do not have access to a large sample size or if there are too many conditions. In such cases, researchers can use random counterbalancing, where the sequence of condition is randomized. The counterbalancing procedure is useful because it not only eliminates the order effect, which is the confounding variable, but also allows researchers to detect the order effect. In the previous slide, we discussed the within subject design where participants are tested in one condition at a time. However, researchers can also vary the conditions within a single session. For example, suppose there are 10 unattractive defendants. like maybe the picture, the 10 pictures of unattractive, what did I say? The 10 pictures of unattractive defendants as one condition and the 10 attractive defendants as another condition. Researchers can present these defendants in a randomized order so that participants are tested in both conditions within a single session. Between subjects or within subjects. So, which design, between subjects or within subjects, is better? Advantages of the between subject design include the absence of a carryover effect and a shorter testing time per participant compared to the within subject design. However, extraneous variables such as individual differences must be more strictly controlled compared to within subject design. Advantages of the within subject design include eliminating individual differences since the same people participate in all conditions. This design also requires fewer participants than the between subject design, but researchers must account for the carryover effect. However, within subject design are not suitable for studies involving treatment intended to produce long-term changes in participants' behavior or condition. For example, if participants receive training to reduce prejudice and racial discrimination, it's pointless to assign them to a control condition. Another example is placebo knee surgery. After the surgery, the patients experience less pain and a better mobility, so it does not make sense to place them in another condition. All right, next section, section 25, experimentation and validity. In this section, we discuss four validities to help assess whether an experiment is accurate. Four big validities. When an independent variable caused the change in the dependent variable, your study has high internal validity. For example, imagine you are always tired in the morning and sleepy. It could be caused by maybe a lack of sleep, poor diet, or it's possible that it's sleep apnea. In research with good internal validity, researchers can eliminate other explanations and can get to the real cause of sleepiness, which may be, in this case, sleep apnea. External validity concerns how accurately a study's results reflect populations or settings beyond the specific study. Also called generalizability, this ability tends to be stronger when the participants and the situations closely resemble those the researchers aim to apply the findings to, often referred to as mundane realism. For example, researchers might want to see if the color of a cereal box affects sales at a grocery store. Conducting the study with actual shoppers in a real store would yield high external validity and high mundane realism. Conversely, if data is gathered from undergraduate students using a computer at a psychology lab, the external validity could be low. However, since the same cognitive process is involved, the lab study could still have high psychological realism. Next, construct validity. Construct validity assesses how well the variables in a study are measured or manipulated. It is about the extent to which the operational variables used in a study accurately represent the conceptual variables. In short, you need to have a clear and precise definition of the variables you measure or manipulate in your study. Construct validity is always important regardless of the type of claims because a clear operational definition not only enables researchers to test their hypothesis, but also to compare their results with other research findings. For example, let's say 80% of college students have been depressed during the last year. How is depression operationally defined? Should college students be simply asked if they have ever been depressed during the last year, or should we administer a depression inventory? Maybe we should look at the records from psychological services on campus. To have good construct validity, you should borrow the operational definition from successful studies rather than creating your own. Next, statistical validity, also known as statistical conclusion validity, is about the extent to which the study's conclusions are reasonable and accurate. The questions asked will vary depending on the claim. When interrogating frequency claims, the percentages are usually accompanied by a margin of error, a statistic based on sample size, which indicates where the true value in the population probably lies. For example, if the margin of error is plus or minus 5 percentage points of 80%, then it means that the true percentage of depressed college students probably lies between 75% and 85%. Statistical validity is usually relevant in frequency claims. A common critique of experiments is that they lack enough participants. This criticism mainly comes from the difficulty of applying findings to a larger population based on a small sample. While this issue often relates to external validity, there are cases where small sample size are not problematic if the sample accurately represents the population of interest. Even studies with a single participant can be very insightful in psychological research. Therefore, the main concern with small sample is often about statistical validity, which questions whether the statistical methods used are appropriate and support the study's conclusions. Prioritizing validities. Achieving high validity in all four areas within a single study is often rare. In fact, many researchers do not aim for this. Instead, many experimental studies focus on internal validity, which is whether the independent variables influence the changes in the dependent variables, and construct validity, whether variables are well defined and accurately measured. If you are the practitioners, such as a clinical psychologist or counseling psychologist, and studying the effect of a certain treatment, you might prioritize external validity more. Which validity you emphasize depends on your research questions and the chosen research design. All right, the last section, 26, practical considerations. This section covers practical issues important for designing both experimental and non-experimental studies. Recruiting participants. One of the first things you need to do in an empirical study is to think about how to recruit participants. One way to do so is to use a subject pool, which consists of undergraduate students in psychology courses, usually introductory courses, who are required to participate in a research study for some credit. Those who are in the subject pool are volunteers, and there are some differences between them and non-volunteers. Volunteers tend to be more engaged with the research topic, more educated, and have greater need for approval. They also typically possess higher IQs, are more sociable, and belong to a higher social class. This variation may pose a threat to external validity if these characteristics influence behavior differently from the broader population of interest. For example, when testing various persuasion methods, a rational argument may be more effective on volunteers than on the general population due to their typically higher education levels and IQ. In field experiments, the focus is more on selecting participants than recruiting them. For example, a study examined how being smiled at influences helping behavior, involving supermarket shoppers as participants. A confederate working for researchers, walking downstairs, looked at a shopper ascending and either smiled or did not smile. Soon afterward, the shopper encountered another confederate who dropped computer diskettes. The question was whether they helped pick up the diskettes. Um, the two key aspects of this study. The first, note that these participants were not recruited. Informed consent was unnecessary because the situation was unlikely to cause harm, as the study occurred during participants' usual activities. Secondly, the researchers needed to choose participants from all the shoppers who used the stairs that day. It is important that this selection follows clear, pre-established rules that researchers can explain after the data collection is over. To avoid bias, each time the Confederate went down the stairs, he was told to look at the first person aged 20 to 50 who looked back. Without rules, he might pick friendly looking shoppers when smiling or unfriendly looking when not smiling. These biases, often unintentional, can distort the study. In other words, this can become a confounding variable. Standardizing the procedure. Some experimenters may greet certain participants warmly but not others, and provide more detailed instructions to some but not others. These unstructured instructions can potentially create noise, making it difficult to detect the effect of the independent variable. In addition, the gender of experimenters can affect the results of a study. In general, male and female experimenters may interact with participants in a slightly different manner, which can be enough to cause differences in how participants behave and react. For example, in a study on pain perception, the participants immersed their hands in icy water for as long as they could. Male participants tolerated the pain longer when the experimenter was a woman, and female participants tolerated it longer when the experimenter was a man. The textbook authors did not mention this, but I'm thinking that the participants were heterosexual um, in order to reduce the individual difference. The best way to reduce unintended effects from the procedure is to standardize it as much as possible, ensuring it is performed consistently for all participants, regardless of their condition or who is conducting the experiment. Here are several ways to achieve this. Develop a detailed protocol outlining all actions and speech from greeting to dismissal. Create standard instructions for participants to read or be ready by the experimenter. To be read. What did I say? Create standard instructions for participants to read or be read by the experimenter. Use software or slides to automate procedures. Anticipate common questions and prepare responses. Train multiple experimenters together, ensuring they test all experimental conditions. In my research lab, I used to train my research assistants for several weeks, so the individual differences between them will be minimized. But today, we provide written instructions for participants to read, which are implemented in the experimental app we use when collecting data. Another good practice is to use experimenters be blind to the research question or testing condition to reduce expectancy effects. In drug studies, for example, neither participants nor experimenters usually know who receives the drug or placebo, making it a double-blind study. A single-blind study only hides the condition from participants. However, blinding is not always possible, especially if you are the only experimenter or must adjust procedures based on conditions. Record keeping. During the session, researchers should keep detailed records such as basic demographic data, the date, time, location, and the experimenter's name, along with notes on unusual events like confused or uncooperated participant, or any questions that come up. This information can be useful not only in data analysis and managing data anomalies like outliers, but also in developing future research ideas. Because research participation should be anonymous, no identifiable information should be included in the data. Instead, assign each participant a unique number. Manipulation check. The experimental studies, researchers manipulate independent variables to observe their effect on dependent variables. For instance, a researcher might indirectly increase participants' stress levels by telling some that they have 5 minutes to prepare a short speech to deliver in front of a group of people. In such cases, researchers often include a manipulation check to ensure the independent variable was successfully changed. This manipulation check might involve administering a stress questionnaire or measuring blood pressure immediately after the manipulation or at the end of the procedure to verify that the variable was effectively altered. Manipulation checks are essentially important when is really important because when an experiment yields null results or fails to find statistical significance. In such cases, a manipulation check helps the experimenter determine whether the null result is due to a genuine lack of effect of the independent variable on the dependent variable, or if it stems from a problem with the manipulation of the independent variable. Imagine, for example, that you expose the participants to happy or sad movie music, intending to put them in happy or sad moods, but you found that this had no effect on the number of happy or sad childhood events they recalled. One possible explanation is that being in a happy or sad mood does not influence memories of childhood events. Alternatively, the music might not have effectively induced the intended mood. Conducting a manipulation check, such as assessing participants' moods, could clarify this. If the manipulation check confirms successful mood manipulation, it suggests that the mood has no impact on childhood memories. However, if it shows the manipulation failed, a more effective method would be necessary to investigate the question properly. Manipulation checks are usually conducted at the end to verify that the effect persisted through the procedure and to prevent revealing the manipulation, which could lead to demand characteristics. However, a better practice for researchers is to include a manipulation check during a pilot test to save time and resources on a failing experiment and instead concentrate on improving the independent variable manipulation. Pilot testing or preliminary study. Conducting a pilot test for your experiment is always a good idea. It involves a small-scale study to verify that a new procedure functions as intended. During the pilot test, you can recruit participants either formally, such as from an established subject pool, or informally, like family, friends, or classmates. Now, please note that if you go with the subject pool, you must first obtain an approval from the IRB committee. The number of participants can be small, but it should be sufficient to ensure your procedure works as intended. A pilot test or preliminary study helps answer several key questions before the full study. These questions include whether participants understand the instructions, what misunderstandings or mistakes they have, what questions they ask, if they get bored or frustrated, whether an indirect manipulation is effective, including manipulation check, if they can guess the research questions, how long the procedure takes, if programs are working properly, and if data are recorded correctly. To answer these questions, observe participants carefully during the procedure and discuss it afterward. Participants may hesitate to criticize openly, so clarify that their feedback is valuable for improving the pilot test. If the procedure works, then proceed. If not, fix issues, retest, and refine until ready for the actual study. This concludes Chapter 5.